whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei. The government fires up its top-level national security group in the face of the never-ending parliamentary protest. We reveal the identity of one of the go-betweens who met with David Seymour out back of the backbencher. The gold-plated deal between New Zealand Rugby and American equity giant Silver Lake. What's in it for the game's grassroots? The 30-minute money back on petrol tax that got drivers gassed up, and the princely price of mints. You know the saying, charging like a wounded bull. Battling the bicycle black market, and not just top of the class, but top of the world. We talk to the young wordsmith slaying it with his pen. Don't forget, you can watch us live on Sky Channel 83.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The top-level national security group, ODESC, has met to discuss the ongoing anti-mandate protest in the capital. The minister responsible for the country's intelligence agencies, Andrew Little, says they considered the disruption to Wellington and concerning underlying elements of the protest. Mr Little says the protest is more than just dance music and concerts.
When you get people going around saying they're travelling to Wellington in order to carry out executions, when you get people publicly saying they're travelling to Wellington to effectively kidnap politicians and ministers and threatening to, storm Parliament or disrupt Parliament, actually you've got to be concerned about that.
Andrew Little says he hasn't received any information to confirm any foreign interference at the protest. In news just to hand, RNZ understands Parliament's Speaker is asking all political parties to sign a letter to protesters calling for an end to illegal protest activity around Parliament. It's understood the letter states politicians cannot enter into a dialogue with protesters until all illegal activity ceases. Many protesters are adamant most of the group are in it for the long haul, but some told RNZ they know they can't stick around forever.
I'll stay for the weekend, then I've got work commitments. I've got to go back and look after employees and stuff. Probably do that, come for the weekend for as long as it takes.
I'm hoping that we come to some sort of resolution in the next few days, actually. I'll be honest, I've got children, I've got one here, but the rest of them are at home with my sisters and my oldest son. Well, they can't do that forever, I'm the mum.
It's complicated, but we should listen to each other more.
The number of COVID-19 cases in New Zealand continues to break records. The Ministry of Health says there are 1,573 new community cases today, with 15 at the border. Ministry figures show that since January the 22nd, when the first Omicron case was detected in the community, people who are double vaccinated and test positive are 10 times less likely to require hospitalisation than unvaccinated cases. 4% of unvaccinated people have required hospitalisation, compared to 0.4% of double vaccinated cases. 10,000 laboratory workers, contact tracers and other critical health staff on the front lines of the pandemic response are set to strike twice next month over stalled contract talks. The Public Service Association says its members have had enough after 15 months of fruitless negotiations. Ruth Hill reports.
There are 70 groups of District Health Board workers involved, from laboratory technicians to contact tracers and mental health staff. A union organiser, Will Matthews, says they care deeply about their patients, but they are burnt out, overworked and underpaid, and the support for nationwide industrial action is unprecedented. He says DHBs and the government need to make a decent offer that addresses problems with pay, progression and understaffing. 2 24-hour strikes are planned for the 4th and 18th of March.
A major independent report has found nurses are overworked and exhausted because of consistent understaffing, and that patients aren't always getting full care. The Safe Staffing Review was ordered by the Minister of Health after pressure from nursing unions. Health correspondent Rowan Quinn reports.
The review says staffing shortages exacerbated by border closures have taken a significant and lasting toll on nurses and their families. It found 83% of nurses believe patients don't get full care when hospitals are short-staffed, and about half say they have poor mental health as a result. The nurses' organisation says the real situation is even worse than the report's findings. The Health Minister, Andrew Little, says most district health boards haven't been taking a program to ensure safe staffing seriously enough.
And Immigration Minister Chris Farfoy says there are still a few details to be sorted out amid reports of apparent progress with New Zealand's refugee offer. There's been a standing offer since 2013 to take 150 refugees each year from Australian-run offshore detention centres. Australian Home Affairs Secretary Mike Pizzulo now says the matter's back for a final round of negotiations, agreeing with the characterisation there's an in-principle deal in place. Mr Farfoy has told reporters in New Zealand that we're not there yet. Amnesty Australia says there are still 104 people on Papua New Guinea, 112 on Nauru, and more than 1,100 who were brought back to Australia for medical reasons. Now to sport, and career best figures of 7 for 23 by pace bowler Matt Henry have helped the Black Caps bundle out South Africa for 95 to take charge of the opening test in Christchurch. His figures are the joint third best by a New Zealander in a test, while South Africa's total is their lowest against New Zealand. A short time ago, New Zealand were 36 for 2 with Will Young, the batsman, out. Cash-strapped provincial rugby unions are relieved the NZR, Silver Lake and the Rugby Players Association have finally agreed on an investment deal. The US private equity firm will invest $200 million, giving them between 5 and 9% in a new commercial entity that will run the NZR's revenue-generating assets. The chief executive of Counties Monaco Rugby, Aaron Lawton, says the deal can't be underestimated.
Having lived in a provincial union environment where it is fairly hand-to-mouth on an annual basis, I think if we get this right, and again, I hasten to add that the detail needs to be worked through, but if we get this right, this investment into the game could turbocharge everything and certainly have a real positive flow-on effect for the community.
And at the Beijing Winter Olympics, New Zealand free skiers Chloe McMillan and Anya Burra have failed to qualify for the final of the women's half-pipe. That's the news.
Patients run spin.
This is a different type of protest. To be hanging nooses in our garden is offensive.
Protesters push the boundaries.
We need to make sure the vehicles get moved. We need to make sure that the intimidating behaviour particularly is acted on.
And a nurse pushes back against misinformation.
So I phoned up Dad. I said, can you please get the spray paint out ready to go? So I wore like massive hoodie and I wore a Shrek mask.
No disguises here. Morning reports weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. First, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. For Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, generally fine. The odd shower about eastern Coromandel tomorrow. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. A few showers today and tomorrow, mainly inland during the afternoon or evening. Some may be heavy. Waikato to Taumarunui, also Taupo and Taihape. Mainly fine. Isolated showers in the afternoon or evening today and tomorrow. Taranaki to Wellington, also Wairarapa, mostly fine. The odd shower about Taranaki developing this evening and afternoon showers about the Taradua district tomorrow. For Nelson and Marlborough, fine apart from isolated showers today, mostly inland. For Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine. High cloud increasing in Otago and Southland tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, partly cloudy. Occasional rain in Fiordland becoming heavy late tomorrow and the odd shower developing elsewhere. And for the Chatham Islands, long fine spells. It's 7 minutes past 5. We'll have news headlines for you at 5:30.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint te tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Day 10 of the Parliament protest and a high-powered security meeting has been convened to find a way through the impasse. Police have rowed back the rhetoric on towing the cars, still littering the streets around Parliament, blocking people getting about their daily business and blocking neighbouring businesses. Instead, police have said they're taking the care required not to escalate the tensions. Meanwhile, the Defence Minister says if the Army's called on to clear the streets. They'll wreck all cars and caravans in the way. There's no sign of the demonstrators moving on. The occupation is actually growing. More protesters arriving with a desire to be heard. And in the latest development, the Speaker has asked all political parties to sign a letter to protesters calling for an end to illegal protest activity. We'll have more on this throughout the program, but first here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
10 days they've been at Parliament, a constant presence and a promise of many more days to come.
Well, you look at the likes of Ihu Mato, that went for 2 years. I think they're pretty dug in as far as the cars and the tents and things go.
He's one of an influx of new protesters arriving today, an insurgence of numbers, new tents popping up on side streets, more cars pulling up. The police associations warned it could last 3 months, though some involved are still holding out for a breakthrough.
I'm hoping that we come to some sort of resolution in the next few days, actually. I'll be honest, I've got children, I've got one here. I was hoping that by now we might have formed a group or something.
It's complicated, but we should listen to each other.
For the politicians, the reality has certainly set in.
I think we're all prepared that it may take some time.
They look like they're here for a while.
I'm pretty fed up. The people of Wellington are fed up. I'm sure you're all fed up too.
Despite a promise to start towing cars yesterday, the police have so far held off, confirming only that they do have the towing capability. Police bosses this morning called a high-level meeting with key government agencies, a security committee called ODESC, typically convened in the wake of natural disasters.
It tells us that agencies are wanting to coordinate, and that is absolutely as we would expect.
I was frankly surprised to hear it hadn't happened sooner. I think, like a few people, I assumed it was sort of already underway.
Patience is clearly fraying, frustration building. The National MP, Chris Bishop, says it's up to the police to resolve matters. But for a moment, he slipped back into opposition mode.
I think it's time for a bit of a plan from the government in relation to exactly what's going to happen.
The way that the protest and the occupation is managed is for the police.
4 army vehicles have been stationed in Wellington, pre-positioned in case their assistance is needed with towing. But any such decision would require ministerial sign-off, and the Defence Minister, Peeni Henare, suggests that's unlikely.
Now, I know there's been a request for towing vehicles. Many of the Defence Force towing vehicles aren't actually towing vehicles, they're salvage vehicles. So if one of them were to pick up a car, it would wreck the car.
Little progress either when it comes to a diplomatic solution. RNZ understands the Speaker, Trevor Mallard, has approached political parties to find cross-party consensus to find a way to end the occupation. He wants them to sign a letter saying there won't be any dialogue while the illegal activity persists. It won't be easy. Ex-leader David Seymour offered a similar olive branch to the protesters yesterday, only for it to blow up in his face.
I just feel like it's kind of opportunistic, really, because he was against us and now he's kind of leaning more towards us, but I think he knows that a lot of people here are a part of his voting demographic.
Because he's just going along with fake news, really.
Today it was ex-Deputy Brooke Van Velden left to field questions, still hopeful of dialogue, but no response from the movement.
We will not be meeting with protesters until the ground rules have been met, which is that we need to clear the streets, we need to make sure that businesses can keep operating and people in Wellington can feel safe again.
With no movement on that ground yet, the hope of any imminent breakthrough seems highly unlikely. The standoff is now a dig-in.
Our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch, joins me now. Craig, what more do you know about what the Speaker is asking for here?
Afternoon, Lisa. I have the statement in front of me. It has now been issued publicly. It says there will be no dialogue with protesters currently occupying the precinct and surrounding areas until the protest returns to one within the law. That includes the clearing of all illegally parked vehicles that are blocking streets. It includes the removal of unauthorised structures, so that would include, of course, the gazebos and tents out on Parliament's lawn, and the cessation of the intimidation of Wellingtonians. Now, the statement begins with the Speaker saying, Trevor Mallard saying, I have been authorised to make this statement, the view of all parties in Parliament. It goes on at the very end, he notes that there has been a history of parliamentarians attending peaceful protests or hearings from the leaders of groups who are at Parliament peacefully. So making a clear distinction there that while there has been dialogue in the past, it has only been with peaceful protests, and this one they do not see in that way.
It is an interesting development for a couple of reasons, isn't it, Craig? First off, is this a slap across the wrist for David Seymour? But secondly, this is a statement on behalf of all parties, so David Seymour agrees with it.
There has been some consensus here, yes, cross-party consensus. In fact, we just got a very brief comment from David Seymour before coming on air. He says he completely supports and endorses this move, and in fact sees it as an endorsement of his action yesterday. That was, of course, when he approached a small delegation of protesters and made a statement along the lines of this, really, which is that there wouldn't be any dialogue, or he wouldn't be prepared to have further meetings until any illegal activity persisted. So he is seeing this as in line entirely with his action yesterday, rather than a slap on the wrist.
Yeah, and he was very careful to say that he met with intermediaries as opposed to frontline protesters per se. But I'm wondering also, is this a back down, or does it suggest a back down from the government? Because reading between the lines, if the protesters were to move their cars, remove the illegal structures and be on their best behaviour, are they then saying a delegation is going to go and speak to them, including people from the government?
That is the interesting thing about this statement, perhaps not what it says so much as what it does not say. There is no promise in this statement that there will be dialogue. There is no promise that there will be a meeting. There is only a simple statement that there won't be dialogue at this stage. There won't be dialogue while this illegal activity persists. I think that the statement has been worded in such a way to get that full support from all parties, because I know for a fact that there are some parties within in Parliament that would not in any way be prepared to engage in any one-on-one dialogue.
Interesting that the Speaker is putting out the statement in his name, given, well, perhaps some criticism of his actions in piping unpopular pop music and turning the sprinklers on this group.
Plenty of criticism from the opposition parties in recent days of Trevor Mallard's involvement. In fact, Chris Bishop just earlier today was saying that perhaps Mr Mallard should be limiting his involvement at all in this protest action and in his management of it. He is, of course, the head of Parliament. He is responsible for all political parties, and so it is him who is ultimately responsible, and it makes sense for him to take this sort of position in terms of issuing such a statement. Whether or not it wins him any favours or allows the opposition to see him in a better light, I think that's probably less likely.
Appreciate the update there. That is Craig McCulloch, our Deputy Political Editor, with the recent developments, a statement from the Speaker of the House, that is Trevor Mallard, saying, well, on behalf of all parties, that there's going to be no dialogue with the protesters until they meet a certain number of, requests, which is to remove the illegally parked cars, get rid of the unauthorised structures, so that's the tents and the paraphernalia, and they must cease to intimidate Wellingtonians. No dialogue until any of that happens. Well, today we have been trying to reach some of the protest intermediaries who met ACT leader David Seymour to discuss what he called a mature de-escalation of the standoff at Parliament. Now, Checkpoint can reveal that one of the people he met near the Backbencher pub is Glenn Inwood. Mr Inwood confirmed he was at the meeting but wouldn't explain his exact role. He told me he had no involvement in the protest other than knowing some of the protesters, whom he supported 100%. Glenn Inwood has previously worked for Radio New Zealand and was a spokesperson for the institute that runs Japan's so-called scientific whaling program. He was also a press secretary in the Clark Labour government, working with the then Minister Leanne Dalzell. Now, according to his professional profile, Mr Inwood is a partner in a firm specialising in marine global governance. Once he knew we were recording, I asked him more about his role in the standoff. So, Glenn, have you had any conversations with the government about this meeting with David Seymour and what may help bring this protest to an end?
I have no more answers for you, Lisa.
Can you just explain what your position is in terms of vaccine mandates?
Lisa, I have no more answers for you. I don't need.
It's an opportunity.
I'm not going to talk to you. It's not an opportunity at all.
It's an opportunity to state what your position is.
I'm not going to give you any answers. Okay. I don't know how you got that I'd spoken to David Seymour, and look, that's fine. You know that, but I'm not going to talk to you about this at all. It was a private conversation, and that is the end of it.
What are you trying to achieve
Lisa,
from that meeting, Glenn?
I appreciate the call, Lisa. Appreciate the call. Bye-bye.
Glenn Inwood there. It is 18 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora rawatu mo te whakarongo mai e haere nei. How much would you pay for a kilo of humble mincemeat? Now, homai o whakaro, we would love your feedback. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mo te hōtaka nei, especially on the developments at the protest. Should politicians negotiate, talk to, mediate with those people camped outside of Parliament, or should they wait until they meet these requirements? How do they need to handle it? Your ideas, please. Pātui mai. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email, checkpoints@rnz.co.nz. After a year and a half of at times bitter wrangling, New Zealand Rugby has finally got its much sought-after deal with US private equity firm Silver Lake. The deal will see Silver Lake invest $200 million in a new commercial entity that will cover NZR's commercial generating assets. But it's taken New Zealand Rugby and the Players Association 18 months to piece together a deal they can agree on. Sports editor Stephen Hewson has more.
Last year, the 26 provincial rugby unions approved the sale of a 12.5% stake in the NZR's commercial arm, worth around $387 million. But the Players Association rejected that, countering with a suggestion to sell a 5% stake through a public offer. Today's deal will see Silver Lake get a 5.5% stake in the newly established Commercial Co, which will run the NZR's revenue-generating assets. Although that stake could increase to 8.5%, when a $100 million share offer goes to New Zealand-based investment companies later in the year. The NZR Chief Executive Mark Robinson describes today's announcement as momentous and providing capital to invest in all levels of the game, with Silver Lake providing them also with new global opportunities.
This is a proposal that we believe can take our game to the world and really deliver on what we believe is the potential of our brands and the sport in New Zealand on a global stage.
While the deal means less for the cash-strapped provinces than the one presented a year ago, Robinson's confident the provinces will officially sign off on it at a meeting next month.
We would like to think we have, if we're going to progress forward with something this significant, we would like it to be a really clear, clean majority, and we know we've got a really strong mandate to enter into this.
Negotiations haven't been easy, but Players Association boss Rob Nicholl says the new deal represents a genuine partnership, and the communication between the three parties has improved markedly over the past few months.
The engagement over the last 3 or 4 months has just been outstanding. So, the way in which we collaborate, the way in which we've talked, exchanged ideas, listened to each other, solve problems, and what we've actually ended up developing, in all honesty, is something that I think 8 to 12 months ago none of us would have actually expected, and that's actually a sign of a really good, robust process.
The deal will certainly provide a major boost for cash-strapped provincial unions, says the head of Counties Manukau Rugby, Aaron Lawton.
Having lived in a provincial union environment where it is fairly hand-to-mouth on an annual basis, I think if we get this right, and again, I hasten to add that the detail needs to be worked through, but if we get this right, this investment into the game could turbocharge everything and certainly have a real positive flow-on effect for the community.
Silver Lake is based in the Silicon Valley in California and was formed at the height of the dot-com tech boom just over 20 years ago, becoming one of the largest technology investment companies in the world. It now has a $300 billion portfolio with substantial holdings in the likes of Dell Computers, Airbnb and Twitter. Over the past 5 years, though, it's increased its presence in sport. It's part of a consortium which owns the UFC and also has interests in the NBA's New York Knicks and the NHL's New York Rangers, along with English Premier League football side Manchester City, and more recently bought a 30% stake in Australian football's A-League. Managing Director Stephen Evans says digital technology is transforming all sport, and Silver Lake can help New Zealand Rugby be at the forefront of that.
Well, joining me now is the Players Association Chair and former All Black captain David Kirk. Kia ora, David. We've talked about this before. We've talked about this deal before, and you hated the idea of a Silver Lake deal. So what's changed?
I didn't hate the idea of a Silver Lake deal per se. We, the players, collectively, were not comfortable that the deal that was presented last time was the most appropriate deal we could find.
So what makes this a better deal and the deal in your mind?
Well, for one thing, it's been worked through by all of the parties. We've all worked together on it, and we've come to a collective conclusion on it. And a number of things have changed in the deal. The valuation's changed, the amount of New Zealand Rugby's income generating assets that have been sold has been reduced, and the cost of the deal has been reduced, and that it's changed to a convertible note, which has a 4% fixed interest rate for a minimum of 3 years. So that's just the financial side of it, but also New Zealand institutions are now able to invest in the same security in exactly the same way as Silver Lake can.
So you're saying that mum and dad investors will get a crack at owning a chunk of the All Blacks in essence?
In the first place, it'll be New Zealand institutions, so New Zealand super funds, New Zealand investment funds, but they're a proxy for mum and dad New Zealanders in the first place because they're investing mum and dad New Zealanders' funds on their behalf to help them save for retirement.
That's up to potentially 100 million, isn't it, David? And it has to be on agreement from both sides. So is it actually 100% going ahead that there will be that opportunity?
All the parties in good faith have committed to that opportunity and want to see that opportunity come to fruition. And who knows? A lot of things can change in financial markets, but it seems very unlikely to us that wouldn't go ahead, and it's entirely the intention of all the parties that it would go ahead. The other thing I didn't get a chance to mention is that selling to New Zealand institutional investors now is also creates cornerstone investors for a potential IPO of Silver Lake's stake, along with the institutional investor stake, sometime down the road in the future. And as part of this deal, the board of the commercial entity owning New Zealand's income-generating assets is required after 5 years to consider an IPO. And we think returning Silver Lake's shareholding to New Zealanders via that mechanism would be a great outcome all around.
But there's no guarantee that will happen. Silver Lake is in there for a minimum of 5 years, and then it's up to it whether it decides to on-sell.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
They've been pretty clear that they see it as a great outcome if they could find a way to sell back to New Zealanders. Clearly the value will have to be comparable to what they could get elsewhere. That's only fair, but they say they would be keen to see that stake resting with New Zealanders at the end of their tenure.
Okay, so that's some of the money. Let's talk about some of the philosophy, right? The press statement around this says this is the beginning of a transformational phase for rugby. I mean, what does that mean?
Good question. What it means is that New Zealand rugby has a need for more capital and has a need for more capability, more connections with people, and to have people working with us who are able to invest capital effectively to grow the revenue that comes back into the game in New Zealand, which can then be distributed appropriately to provinces, to the professional game.
Yeah, how much are the provinces getting? Exact numbers, what are they getting?
Whatever they were supposed to be getting from the last deal.
So about $39 million across all the unions.
Right.
Okay.
That hasn't changed.
And what about a legacy fund?
Sorry.
What about a legacy fund?
Yeah, legacy fund just means, it's a bit of complicated language, it just means an endowment fund, a fund that's put aside and is not to be drawn on except in emergencies, because the income from that fund will be used to help run the businesses.
Yep, so how much is going in that pot that's being ring-fenced?
That's what has been reduced somewhat from the previous deal, if you like, earlier. And all the parties agreed that as we looked at all of the trade-offs that we had to make in terms of...
From what to what, David?
I don't know the numbers, but I imagine it's probably about $80 million or something like that, less than the previous one. I don't have those numbers in front of me, sorry. But it's not material. It's still, it is material. That's a material number, but there's at least 150 million going to that legacy fund from memory. So we think that's a very good start to building that legacy fund.
During this whole negotiation, pretty fractious relationships between the players and New Zealand rugby. I mean, how would you describe your relationship now? You got a bit of building back to do there?
Yeah, I think there will be some continuing to rebuild, but I think we have certainly gone a reasonable way down the road of rebuilding through the latter months of the process. We've worked together openly and collaboratively, and there's been give and take, and we've got an agreement that we're all, New Zealand Rugby and ourselves, the Players Association, are presenting to the provinces and the Māori Rugby Board. Together, we have come together to do that.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is the Players Association Chair, David Kirk. Is the price of your favourite sausages making you shudder, or maybe your love of lamb is starting to wane? Well, you're not alone, with shoppers telling Checkpoint meat is increasingly off the menu in favour of cheaper alternatives. Protein prices are on a steady climb, so we sent Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe back to the supermarket.
When it comes to Kai, many Kiwis are mad about meat. All meat, be it a sumptuous sausage, maybe a beef burger or a big juicy steak.
Well, I go for mince, and I do like shoulder chops from time to time, and pork, yes.
Rump steak is good, a bit of lamb, yeah.
Pretty much anything. I do eat a lot of pork and chicken, mainly because they're cheaper, but I do like the steak.
But for the meat-eating public, something's a little bit off, slightly hard to swallow. Forget protein. Today, we're probing price. Now, one of my colleagues stumbled across this piece of newspaper from 2011. Funnily enough, it's got a countdown ad in it, and it's got an ad here specifically for beef mince. 1 kg pack, $6.80. As I said, this is 2011, just over 10 years ago. So we thought we'd come to Countdown, we're here at Countdown Takapuna, and see how things have changed in the last 10 years. Follow me. And some of the prices may make your eyes water. A kilo of mince set us back $14.50, easily double what it was just over 10 years ago. But wait until you hear about the humble topside steak. It's good cooked low and slow, but it's by no means a prime cut. A single piece costing us $10.55, and we're charged $9.25 for a couple of lamb shoulder chops.
I think first of all we've got to acknowledge that the food basket is across the board is becoming challenging for many Kiwi households. If we're looking at beef and lamb in particular, we are an exporting nation. 90% of what we produce of beef and lamb goes abroad, and so the price that we pay here domestically is very much driven by what our overseas customers are willing to pay.
That's Beef and Lamb New Zealand Inc. Chief Executive Kit Arkwright. You've probably heard what he's saying before, but mix that in with pandemic-induced problems pushing protein prices through the roof. There is strong demand for global protein. At the same time, we have seen impacts on the supply side. So big exporting nations like Brazil have had a BSE outbreak. Argentina have been limiting their exports. Australia rebuilding their herd. Those two factors come together and they do put further pressure here domestically on the price. All that leaving Kiwi carnivores petrified by the price of their favourites.
Select more veggies and less meat.
It's pretty grim. Pretty grim.
The short answer is we're buying less red meat, period.
Lamb. I think lamb is, yeah. It's a shame really when we have so much of it here and it goes overseas.
And they're not imagining it. Stats NZ's latest food price index showing meat, poultry and fish prices rose 3.6% just between December and January. And meat prices are 5.7% up in January compared to a year ago.
Everything from the very basics to the very high end. We do the lot.
So wanting more answers, we drop in on well-hung butcher owner Todd Treadwell. He's got it all, from humble sausages through to high-end Wagyu.
Well, we're an export sort of country, and we don't consume nearly as much as what we export, so we pay worldwide prices. That's just a fact of it. Plus the freight costs are all going up, everything's going up, which is just bumping the prices up.
And you think that's hard to swallow? Try this.
We're definitely in an inflation climate. It's going to just keep climbing. It's climbing every week.
Meat price madness creating more worries for the Kiwi wallet.
Well, if you were listening to that on radio, check out the video from our two Nicks online. $14.50 for mince a kilo. Wasn't even premium mince, and it was on special too. Get in touch about your meat mares. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Kia ora, e te iwi e haere nei I a Checkpoint. Nurses overworked and exhausted, according to a new report. A warning to women who don't even know their intimate images are being shared on social media. And on top of the world, we speak to an Avondale College student who smashed his English exam. Homai o whakaaro, we'd love to hear from you about anything on the program tonight. Really interested on whether you're cutting back on meat or getting rid of it altogether in your weekly shop because of the price. What's happening with nachos and spag bowl these days? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now. Ko Iwi anō tēnei.
Thanks, Lisa. Kia ora tātou, ko Ivy Ashton tēnei. The Speaker of the House, Trevor Mallard, says there'll be no dialogue with protesters at Parliament until the demonstration becomes lawful. This would include protesters clearing all illegally parked vehicles that are blocking streets, taking down their tents and other structures, and stopping their intimidation of Wellingtonians. The top-level national security group, ODESC, has met to discuss the protest. They considered the disruption to Wellington and the concerning underlying elements among the demonstrators. The Minister of Police says she's fed up with the occupation at Parliament as it ticks up a 10th day. More tents are being erected and the campers have spread over Bowen Street. The Defence Minister says it would be a large call to get the Army to help respond to the protest. The police approached the Defence Force last week to see if it would help tow away illegally parked vehicles. 10,000 laboratory workers, contact tracers and other critical health staff on the front lines of the pandemic response are set to strike twice next month over stalled contract talks. They're demanding higher pay, equal treatment with other health professions and action on safe staffing and retention. A major independent report has found nurses are overworked and exhausted because of consistent understaffing and that patients are not always getting full care. The report is looking into a safe staffing program that was put in place 15 years ago, but not every district health board has been following properly. There are 1,573 new cases of COVID-19 in the community today, another record. 63 people are in hospital, although none are in intensive care. And in cricket, New Zealand were 65 for 2 a short time ago on the first day of the opening test against South Africa in Christchurch. Earlier, career best figures of 7 for 23 by pace bowler Matt Henry helped the Black Caps bundle out the visitors for 95. Those are the headlines. We'll have a full bulletin for you at 6 o'clock.
Kia ora rā e hono mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku hoa e nai nei, ko Nona Peltier, who is here, of course, to talk business. OK, let's start with stock market operator NZX. It's raising money to buy a stake in Fonterra's global dairy trade business. So what details have you got, Nona?
Yeah, so Fonterra, people will know that they hear about our dairy prices every other week, and that's owned by Fonterra. It's the global dairy trade business. It handles about 20% of the ingredients that Fonterra sells around the world, and so people bid on them from different parts of the world. In any case, Fonterra has approached the NZX and the European Energy Exchange to come into partnership with them. So they're going to each own a third of the business. NZX is going to pay $12.5 million for its share. Of course, it is subject to approvals by shareholders and regulators, but in any case, NZX is also going to raise about $44 million by way of a entitlement offer of NZX shares to existing shareholders. The details, of course, are on their website. But in any case, it's quite an interesting move. It will basically create a less sort of ownership role for Fonterra with the GDT and open it up to perhaps more suppliers of global dairy.
And Nona, the new head of the Financial Markets Authority, expects market participants to be more empathetic. Now, how's that going to work?
Well, it's all coming down to culture and conduct. So they've got a new chief in the job, Samantha Barras. She says that she's going to be looking for empathy. She's going to be looking for education and, of course, enforcement. She's expecting the markets, the insurance agents, the industry rather, bankers and so on, to be a little bit more empathetic with their customers. Listen to them more. Don't just check boxes. I mean, she's looking for some real an improvement in the conduct of the way that customers and these different financial market players interact. So there'll be some changes there. I don't think we're going to see them tomorrow, but certainly they're on their way.
And Nona, market numbers for us?
Yes, I have those. The NZX Top 50 Index. It ended up 1.1% today. That was a 134-point gain to 12,257, and that's on the back of an improving sentiment and people weighing the risk there, the market participants weighing the risk of whether or not the U.S. Federal Reserve will be as aggressive as some feared in tightening policy. As well, the New Zealand dollar benefited from that at 66.8 US cents, 93 Australian, and 49.2 pence.
Thanks, Nona. Ka kite, Nona Peltier there with Business News, and got some more numbers from you guys who have been texting in about your meat mares. This one, I sent the hubby down to the local butcher for 6 sausages, and bless him. He came back with what was asked. $56 was the cost. I think we need more details about what was in these sausages because there was clearly precious metals or something. $56. Send us some more details. And another person says we've cut our meat and dairy right back. It's all too expensive now. And with the environmental impacts of intensive farming, it just makes sense. We're growing heaps more vegetables too. Keep your feedback coming. You can text us on 2101. Nurses say they've been vindicated by an independent report that's found what they've been saying for years. They're overworked and stressed, and patients are suffering. The review into safe staffing was ordered by the Health Minister, Andrew Little, after pressure from the nurses organisation, and has been released today. It says unless more nurses are hired urgently, the situation is going to be impossible to fix. Our health correspondent, Rowan Quinn, joins me now. So, Rowan, what does this tell us about life for frontline nurses and their patients?
I guess what it does is it sort of puts into numbers everything that they've been telling us, which is that there's a crisis in staffing that they've been talking about for years, frankly. It says that 83% of nurses that they surveyed, and they surveyed about 4,000, so quite a big chunk there, they say patients aren't getting the full care they need because of staffing shortages when that happens on wards or in hospitals. About half of the nurses say they have poor or very poor mental health from the stress of working on those understaffed shifts. 41% say that they're asked every week to work extra shifts, and we hear this time and time again in our work from nurses as well, that they're always being asked to fill in when they're already feeling overworked. The report looked at this program called the Care Capacity Demand Management Program, which was brought in 2006 to try to fix this problem, and basically it's found that not all the DHBs are using it properly, and all those figures I've just quoted there, those percentages, that's the impact of that. It's sort of feeding into the problem of short staffing. It said that COVID has made the situation worse because the borders are closed and we have so many international nurses here. We have 30% of nurses are internationally trained, and it says, and I quote, that that's leading to a significant and lasting toll on the well-being of nurses and their whānau. And it says if the number of nurses in the workforce isn't increased, it's going to be impossible to achieve safe staffing, and that nurses are going to stay overworked and exhausted.
And so what does Andrew Little have to say about this?
Well, he says he's laying some of the blame at the feet of the district health boards because they haven't followed that staffing program that I was talking about before. And he's even blaming the last national government for its role in not pushing it enough. Of course, they haven't been in power for 5 years. And he does acknowledge, though, that there are these problems with staffing, and that he says it's a personal goal to give nurses an environment where they feel satisfied in their work and they feel that patients are safe, and he wants to make that happen. He's hoping that when the health reforms come in to play later this year, when DHBs are abolished, that might be a little bit easier.
And any further recommendations to fix this?
Well, what they're saying is that they want to speed up all the existing plans that there are to recruit nurses, more nurses, and, there's a big push to get some from overseas, but it's been pretty lacklustre, the success of that so far. Really, the government kind of talks a good game about bringing in all these overseas nurses, but in reality, COVID has made that worse, but the nurses are saying that they actually want to make it easier for them to come here. So the recommendations from the report are to try and speed that up. It's singled out emergency departments as needing extra work to make sure that they're safe, and we have heard from nurses time and time again that they're often understaffed in this critical part of work, and it wants a review and a redesign of that safe staffing program to try to kind of get it back on track to keep staffing safe again.
Thanks for joining us. That's our health correspondent, Rowan Quinn there. It is almost 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. More now on the cost of living, and the price of petrol continues to climb, edging closer to $3 for 91. A large slice of that is made up of taxes. In Auckland, it's 52% of the bill. The Taxpayers Union today held what it called a Fuel Tax Honesty Day. Those who rolled up to the Gull station in Takapuna between 12 and 12:30 and filled up got 52% of their bill back. The group's spokesperson, Louis Holbrook, says the government can curb the surging prices.
We had a few chats with motorists filling up their tank today, and the cost of living was a recurring theme, and they see the pointy end of that in terms of the petrol costs. When people are informed that the petrol costs are around half tax, that's when they realise that it's actually a political decision. It's true that we can't control global inflation rates, but the cost of petrol is something that the government can control, and it filters through to the cost of pretty much every good that you buy for your household or business.
In the half-hour period, about 60 vehicles came through, with most getting about $50 back.
It feels really good. Yeah, I wasn't sure I would actually get in. I was watching the traffic here. I was like, by the time 1:30 comes, I don't think I'm going to actually be able to fuel. So yeah, I was really glad.
The AA says the sudden rise in prices can be put down to the cost of getting fuel into the country and the ongoing tension on the Russia-Ukraine border. Now, speaking of that, despite 150,000 Russian forces stationed around its border, Ukraine remains relatively calm about the prospect of a full-scale invasion. There's still no sign that Russian forces are de-escalating, despite claims from Moscow that it's pulling some troops back from the border. NATO says Russia's using its military to get what it wants is the new normal in Europe. CNN's Sam Kiley has this report.
The chorus of Kharkiv Opera House singing in defiance of this. Russia massing what the US says are 150,000 troops on three sides of Ukraine's border. In Kharkiv, 25 miles from the frontier, a day of national unity is quickly marked amid dire warnings from Washington.
An invasion remains distinctly possible.
Here, though, a message of calm. Do you expect an invasion? No, we don't expect it, he says. I think we should be ready for anything, but I'm also sure everything is going to be fine. If the Russians did attack, they'd have a short run to Kharkiv. We're driving north towards the border with Russia, which is now about 15 or 20 minutes away. About half an hour beyond that is the city of Belgrade. Now, around Belgrade, according to Russian reports, there is the 1st Guards tank army. On paper, they're capable of mustering 50,000 or so infantry, 600 to 800 tanks. They have Iskander surface-to-surface missiles, but there isn't a single sign on this road north of Kharkiv, a city of 1.5 million people, of any kind of Ukrainian military activity. Just trucks waiting for a routine crossing into Russia. And business as usual at the border crossing here. Russia's on the other side of that fence. The locals here relaxed. Ludmila says, how is it that we're forced to quarrel with our brothers? I just can't comprehend it. On the contrary, we should not have borders at all. There is no will to fight with Russia, and we don't see the will of the Russians to fight with us. There are no armed forces, not even a hint, says Alexander. In case Russia does send tanks into this vast landscape, Ukrainians insist that they recall the words of their national anthem. Our enemies will die as the dew does in the sunshine, and we, brothers, will live happily in our land.
Exams can be stressful at the best of times, but imagine how it feels when you pitch yourself against students around the globe and you come out on top. Well, top of the world is exactly where Justin Yang landed. Earlier, I had words with the Year 11 Avondale College student who blitzed the Cambridge University International English exam. Justin, I feel like we should have a drum roll for this first question, but here we go. What did you score in the English exam, please?
So I got a mark of 99 out of 100.
99 out of 100. Wow. Where do you reckon you dropped that one mark?
I thought like maybe one of my 4 essays was maybe a little bit worse than the other one, so perhaps they decided that one wasn't a perfect one to give 25 to. Yeah.
How did you do it? That is an astronomical score.
It was quite surprising to me, actually, because when I wrote my essays, right, I thought I wrote quite... I felt like I'd written what I felt, what I felt about the literature, about what, my opinion towards it, and I thought that would have been good, but I wouldn't have actually expected to score so well,
So you would have marked yourself down, Justin?
I definitely wasn't expecting a score that high. I'd never actually seen it happen before, so I was assuming that, that's just so out there that I wasn't really even expecting it, really.
So, Justin, is it old school? Do you get an envelope that you open to see your mark, or do you log onto the computer, or how did it work when you saw your scores?
So the school basically sends out a login to everyone, and you can check your scores at a certain time when they release all of them to everyone around the world.
Relive the moment for me, Justin. You log in and you see the English score. What do you do? What do you say?
So I logged in, and because I'd gotten my math result a few days earlier, and it was good, but it wasn't as it wasn't as impressive, I guess you could say, as my English was. So I logged in, and then I saw all of my scores, and the English was the one that was listed first, and it said 99. And I expected I didn't actually expect to get any of the top in New Zealand or top in world awards, because usually you'd need a 100, but in this case it seems that English is I was actually very excited because I was like, wow, I never actually expected to get such a good score. But I wasn't really expecting a top in New Zealand or top in world. Yeah.
Top of the world, Justin. Top of the world. What does it feel like way up there?
Well, I mean, I guess I'm just still still have to go on, work just like everyone else. It felt good. It felt really, really, it felt kind of, I felt thankful and also quite gratified, because I feel like a lot of us worked very hard, and then, the fact that I achieved it felt like, I'd done the work, I put in the work, and I'd written a good essay in the exam.
It was a pretty tough year, COVID, lockdowns and interruptions to learning. It must have been pretty hard to get as far as you have.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, lockdowns, such a long time, because we had a continuous lockdown, and we only exited it just a couple of days before exams started, I think. So there was no school time between August and when exams started. So yeah.
What do you reckon the result means for your future?
I'm not actually that sure. I think in the end, it's quite an impressive achievement, I guess you could say. But in the end, when I'll end up applying with probably different grades anyway. So.
The exam itself, you wrote your essays. What did you write about? Was it a particular book, or can you tell us a little bit about what you were focusing on?
Okay, yeah. So basically there's 2 exams. The first one was about poetry and a novel that we'd studied throughout the year, and the second one where you had to comment on 2 plays that we'd studied throughout the year as well. And
what plays did you write about?
So we did Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, and also Arthur Miller's The Crucible. So those were the 2 plays, yeah.
Absolute classics.
Indeed, yeah.
I have to ask, because you mentioned maths, you said you looked at your maths result and it was pretty good, but not as good as the English. So what did you get in maths?
I got 93 in maths, yeah.
Wowza. That is absolutely amazing. Do you love English, or are you just exceptionally good at English?
It's actually surprising. I feel like I always was I was more inclined towards social science, but I didn't actually choose them. So I feel like some of that writing, I guess the word prowess is very suitable here. Like that kind of ability just carried over to English, and I really enjoyed a lot of the. I really enjoyed writing about it and also reading a lot of the literature this year. So, yeah.
Do you like Shakespeare?
Shakespeare, if I'm being truthful, I think my least favourite text this year was the Shakespeare, but that was more because I think the time we were studying it was a bit difficult, and understanding the language as well is always difficult.
Hey, I don't mean to dwell on this, but this is just amazing. Top of the world, Justin. Top of the world. Nobody beat you.
I guess. I mean, the thing, like, if I am going to be completely honest here, I know that in the world there are a few other people, I think, around the world, out of like maybe the 700,000 students who take them, who do get the same score as you, because no one, I think, got 100, which means that maybe in other countries there were maybe a few people as well.
Oh,
but,
Justin, don't sell yourself short, mate. You're top of the world. Own it.
Too kind.
Own it. Do you reckon you peaked, or are you trying for the full 100 next time round?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I mean, of course you aim for the how do I describe it? You aim for like 100, but then you never expect it, but you want to work at it to get it. And like, even if I don't achieve a 100, like even in my school career, like I'm pretty satisfied with that. Like if I get good grades, like that's.
I hate to put you on the spot, Justin, but can you quote us, a line out of Shakespeare? Did you remember some quotes to use in your essay? Can you still remember them?
There are a few that I still remember. I think Romeo says, "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon, whose vestal livery is but sick and green." Yeah, that's about as much as I think I remember from that passage.
And that was the amazing Justin Yang, 99 out of 100 in his English exam, the Cambridge University International English exam. What was your top score in a school exam? Another student at the college also topped the world, top of the world in their subject, and that was Seven Kim, who got a perfect score, 100% in maths. Absolutely amazing students. Bike theft is an ongoing issue, especially in Tamaki Makaurau, with the growing popularity of e-bikes. Now cyclists have an online tool to help track down their stolen bike, in a move that's aimed at dampening the black market. Reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Marika Habazi went to take a look.
As more and more people opt to cycle for exercise or to commute, and with the value of bikes also climbing, theft is a growing concern. Website and app 529 Tech is trying to fix that, with a system that works a bit like Find My iPhone, but for your bike. Gabriel Gatti from Bike Auckland explains.
529 gives us that opportunity to kind of initiate a search when a bike is stolen. And what does that mean? It means that the community can be kind of tweeted via 529. Stores and online marketplaces can check 529, the database, to look at the serial number and the photo to see, is this person who's trying to sell me a bike the photo, the person who actually owns this bike, and do I recognise the serial number?
It's a simple process for new owners to register.
I've downloaded the app and I'm opening it now. And what I can do there is I can add a bike. So I'm in my garage and I'm adding a bike. So I'm going to give my bike a name. Now I'm going to put in the make and the model of the bike. So there's a few steps here, but basically what we're doing is we're putting in some photos of the bike, some identifying features, the make and the model, etc. The serial number, that's very, very important. And then the second most important thing is a photo of me with my new bike, so that if anyone else ever has it, it's obviously, not theirs.
The technology has been running overseas in Vancouver, and with the combined effort of bike shops, police and bike owners, bike theft's been reduced by 20%. Anyone can search a serial number of a bike they come across to try and reunite it with its rightful owner. Gabriel's hoping that gives people confidence to get on their bike again here.
it's very discouraging if it's stolen, and in fact some people never go back to riding. And many people kind of reduce the amount of trips they would take because they're scared of their bike getting stolen again.
According to police data, the number of stolen bikes in Auckland over the last few years has been sitting at just under 3,000. But Bike Auckland estimates that number's more like 5,000, especially with the number of e-bikes imported into the country almost doubling year on year. Last year, more than $100 million worth came into the country.
At Electric Bike Team, shop owner Maurice Wells plays a big role in that. But he's frustrated a lot of their business is helping customers when their bikes have been stolen.
It might be on a weekly basis that one of my own customers says that a bike they bought from me in the last 4 or 5 years, that's as long as I've been here, has been stolen.
He says even if customers do bother to report their bike as stolen to police, it's extremely difficult to track them down and to tell who's the rightful owner. He's thrilled now they can give customers an extra guarantee.
We could take the bike, check something, look online, see if it was marked stolen, directly then be able to contact someone who can act on that. We can register every bike we sell with the consumer's consent so that it's done for them. It's just a way for a rainy day. They don't have to think about it. Hopefully it never gets stolen, but if it does, they can simply flag it as stolen and a lot of things follow from there.
The goal is to register as many bikes as possible, a potential game changer for the cycling world.
And you can check out that story from Louisa and Marika. The video will be on our webpage. Now, just an update on the earlier message we have from a listener about some exceedingly expensive sausages, $56 for 6 saucies. We demanded more details. 6 pork and fennel sausages, probably slightly bigger than the generic supermarket brand, but never again. In comparison, I can buy a block of tofu to feed the family of 4 for around $4.50. I hope those were damn tasty sausages at $56. Someone else says New Zealanders need to get over their obsession with cheese and meat, ridiculously expensive and overrated. Switch to plant protein sources, sustainable, nutritious and cheap. Your gut bugs will love you for it.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. All parties in Parliament have united under a clear declaration to the protesters outside. There'll be no dialogue while illegal activity persists. The Speaker, Trevor Mallard, issued the cross-party statement about an hour ago. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
The statement asks protesters to move all illegally parked vehicles, remove their tents and food trucks from Parliament's lawn, and cease intimidating Wellingtonians. Not till then will there be any hope of a meeting, as requested by some protesters this week. The ACT leader, David Seymour, offered a similar olive branch yesterday, but was called irresponsible by the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. Mr Seymour says he supports the move towards a mature de-escalation.
The police say they'll continue talks with protest leaders at Parliament despite the Speaker's pledge. They've acknowledged Trevor Mallard's statement and say they'll continue to keep the peace and maintain a visible presence around the parliamentary precinct. Wellington iwi leaders are calling for a peaceful end to the occupation at Parliament, which forms part of the historic Pipitea Pā. Taranaki whānui have also condemned comparisons by protesters to the defence of Parihaka. Port Nicholson Block Settlement Trust Chair Kara Pukitapu Dentis says such comparisons are wrong and amount to cultural misappropriation. He says the ongoing occupation requires a political solution and leaders need to find a way to stop the harm being done to ancestral lands. Mr Pukitapu Dentis says they've had smashed windows and threats have been made against kuia, kaumatua and uri, or family members involved with the COVID response. Auckland health authorities say the rollout of rapid antigen tests has started smoothly and they expect demand will gradually increase. A small number of critical workers deemed close contacts have trickled through the region's 9 test collection centres today. At one site on the North Shore, staff provided tests to about 24 people this morning. Waitemata District Health Board Clinical Lead Dr Sarah Hartnell says a small number of people were turned away because they had symptoms and needed a PCR test instead. She urges anyone needing to collect a rapid antigen test to pre-register online.
If you turn up here without doing that, then we're not going to be able to provide that test for you. So that's the first important point. And then after that, it's relatively easy once you arrive and fairly painless.
There are nearly 100 collection centres nationwide for workers who are part of the Close Contact Exemption Scheme. The National Party is accusing the government of making people who should have been granted an MIQ exemption on compassionate grounds needlessly miss out. Today, those in charge of MIQ told a Parliament Select Committee that work had been underway in the last 10 days to relax the risk assessment tool to enable more people to leave quarantine early. National's Chris Bishop says Omicron has been in the community for weeks.
The moment COVID is in the community, and particularly with Omicron spreading very rapidly in the community, of course the criteria around compassionate early exemptions has to change, because we're far less worried about people spreading COVID into the community from MIQ, but the government didn't do that, and that's on them.
Chris Bishop says the tardiness has meant people have waited in MIQ unnecessarily. The head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade warns the Ukraine crisis is one of the most significant risks to peace and international security since the end of the Cold War. MFAT Chief Executive Chris Seed made the comments to the Parliament's Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Select Committee today. He says any type of war in Europe will negatively affect New Zealand, particularly if sanctions are imposed and Russia retaliates.
It definitely means disruption. Almost certainly it will, at least for a time, mean higher oil prices. It clearly already means impacts on international share markets. All of those things will be second-order consequences for New Zealand.
Chris Seed says the international supply chains and New Zealand's ability to trade would also be impacted. The state of emergency in the Bulla district has been extended as the council assesses flood damage estimated to have cost millions of dollars. The council says at least 70 farms have been damaged in last week's storm, with many landowners struggling with access. Building inspectors have identified flood damage in 22 homes and 4 have been red-stickered. The council is also concerned about badly damaged roads and the threat to freshwater supplies in Waimangaroa and Westport. It says early signs are that the damage to infrastructure is unprecedented. And in cricket, New Zealand are 85 for 2 on the first day of the opening test against South Africa at Hagley Park in Christchurch. Earlier, career best figures of 7 for 23 by pace bowler Matt Henry helped the Black Caps bundle out the visitors for 95. That's South Africa's lowest ever total against the Black Caps. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, a global fix from the BBC on reducing police brutality in the wake of George Floyd's death. The final episode of Shirley Gilbert's series on the music the Nazis couldn't kill. And our astronomer Alan Gilmore is back with news of black holes in our local galaxy and the discovery of an Earth-sized exoplanet, more or less, orbiting Proxima Centauri, just down the road in cosmic terms. It's all on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint, but first the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. For Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, generally fine, the odd shower about eastern Coromandel tomorrow. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, a few showers today and tomorrow, mainly inland during the afternoon or evening, some may be heavy. Waikato to Taumarunui, also Taupo and Taihape. Mainly fine, isolated showers in the afternoon or evening today and tomorrow. Taranaki to Wellington, also Wairarapa, mostly fine. The odd shower about Taranaki developing this evening and afternoon showers about the Tararua district tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough, fine apart from isolated showers today, mostly inland. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine. High cloud increasing in Otago and Southland tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, partly cloudy. Occasional rain in Fiordland becoming heavy late tomorrow and the odd shower developing elsewhere. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, long, fine spells. It's coming up to 7 minutes past 6. Our next news and weather is... I'll have headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora rā, Evie. No mai, hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. There was a record 1,573 new community cases of COVID-19 today, and New Zealand schools have been warned that COVID is right on their doorsteps. The sobering words come from the Auckland Secondary Schools Principals Association, as the number of schools across the country with COVID-19 almost doubled in 3 days. There are now 320 schools with COVID. Checkpoint has learned all Year 13 students at Auckland Melbourne's St Kentigern College have been sent home for a week after a student tested positive. St Kentigern College did not get back to our request for an interview, but Stephen Hargreaves is the president of the Principals Association, and he says it's crunch time in the classroom. He joins us now. Kia ora. Can you talk us through what's happening here with schools? It's affecting a whole lot of them, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, in the lead-up piece there, you see it's on our doorstep. I think it's right in amongst us. I know that a couple of schools are closed completely and they've gone to remote learning. Like you said, St Kent's have sent one year level home. We're all just really clinging on, and we know that at some point we're going to lose a lot of staff and students home isolating, and we're probably going to end up remote learning like we did last year.
So who decides who has to isolate, or does the school make their own decisions about that, or are they instructed?
Yeah, the schools have a bit of autonomy. In the end, the principal and the board get to decide if the school will send students home for remote learning. But there's another step involved there, and that's who has to isolate. So obviously the Ministry of Health, they are involved in that contact tracing, and they will message people directly and say that you've been identified as a close contact, you have to isolate. But the schools are also closely involved in that process, and the Ministry of Health will work with schools. For instance, we're the ones who will know if a student has been eating lunch with some students with their masks off, and then that makes them a close contact. So we get involved in that process too.
You mentioned the fact that while the clock is ticking potentially for swathes of schools to be going back to home learning, are teachers heavily affected here, and are there shortages already?
Yes, I mean, we haven't had a positive case in school yet, but I still have several staff at home isolating because they've been identified as close contacts in other situations. And that's
so how do you handle that, Stephen? Do they keep teaching but remotely, or are they effectively on sick leave, or how are you managing that?
It's really quite tricky, and actually different things happen in different scenarios. So at the moment, those teachers are at home on leave, and we'll be able to claim that leave back, that sick leave back, but we're putting relievers in the class. And at some point, if the number gets too high, then that's when we have to decide, can we actually safely manage the school on campus, or do we have to send everybody home?
Is everyone battling for the same pool of relievers?
Yes, there aren't enough relievers. We've got a staffing shortage, particularly in certain subjects. A lot of relievers don't want to come in because they're of an age where they just think that adds too much risk. So the pool of relievers is really small, and that's a problem. And I think this is where we were talking about the RAT testing as being a solution to help schools get through. Because if I've got staff who are isolating at home, I know they're fit and well, they'd like to come to school, but they can't because we're not included in that critical worker exemption yet.
Yeah, so do you think that's a mistake, and are you making any kind of concerted appeal to the government to change that position?
Yes, we are. Well, we've been talking via the Ministry of Education about that, and it won't be the silver bullet, and I know that supply of the RAT tests is a big issue, but I'd dearly love to be able to have those staff do a RAT test, and if they test negative, to come into school. It solve a lot of problems. In Australia,
they're obviously using these rapid antigen tests on students as well. Would you like them for students, or you really just want them for staff?
No, I can't really see the need for students. I mean, the problem with students is, the cost and just the administration of it would be a headache for a start. But, you lose one teacher, and then that's 30 students for 5 periods a day. It's going to affect 150 students in that way. So I think it's at staff level that I'd really like to get a hold of them.
Do you foresee a situation where we are basically back in lockdown in terms of education and schooling, where there's a blanket decision among the schools to remote learn because it is hitting so many schools and there's going to be staffing issues?
Yeah, I can't see a blanket decision being made. I think it will still go school by school because there's so many differences amongst, how well vaccinated a school population is and whether or not the Omicron is spreading through a particular school. So I think it will still rest locally. The decisions will be made locally. And I just know that we are so desperate to stay in school. The students are so happy to be on campus. We know it's the most effective way of teaching and learning. We want to avoid all of that social isolation. Some subjects just aren't suited to being taught remotely, so we'll do anything we can to keep on campus with face-to-face learning.
Stephen, do you reckon everybody's been honest about their potential exposures then? Because not everyone wants to isolate.
Oh, look, I've heard some idle chatter about that. You know, people aren't scanning in anymore because they don't want to be pinged as a close contact. I know people don't want to rush off and get a test because, you know, the same reason. So I'm sure that's going on. I haven't, you know, heard anybody sort of come out and made a firm declaration that it's me. They're always talking about somebody else they know that's operating in that way.
In terms of the RAT test, obviously, you're not classified as critical businesses, education, schools. Have you tried to or managed to source any of those tests yourselves?
Yes, I have a stash of RAT tests at school, and I would dearly love to be able to use them. But, of course, I can't because it doesn't mean anything in terms of the order, the health order that we've got to operate within. I've actually got them for another reason. I ordered them because I want to test staff who are heading off to a school camp next week, and I want to make sure they're all negative before we hop on the bus and go to camp.
But you cannot use them?
I'm going to use it for that purpose because that's surveillance testing, but I can't use it in terms of that critical worker exemption where people could, you know, test negative and then come into work while they're instead of isolating.
What kind of expense and how difficult was it to get them?
Well, we have a health and safety officer who managed to source them, and I'm not entirely sure how she managed to. She just got online about 3 weeks ago and placed an order, and they've arrived. They arrived yesterday. We have a nurse trained on campus at our health centre who will administer the tests for us, and she'll test about 30 staff who are going to head off on a series of Year 9 camps next week.
And do you think many other schools are in the same situation as you, that they have access to those tests?
I have heard of at least one other that has some tests available, yep.
Really appreciate your time this evening. Thank you for joining us. That's Stephen Hargraves, who's the president of the Principals Association there. A number of schools battling with the fact that they've got a lot of kids off isolating because of COVID cases. Now, COVID cases are surging in Hong Kong as Omicron begins to overwhelm the health system. Thousands of residents are waiting to be admitted to hospital. To make matters worse, China is stepping in, ordering city authorities to get the outbreak under control. Here's the ABC's Bill Birtles.
Outside some Hong Kong hospitals, patients are now lying in beds or sitting on stools, waiting for space inside to free up. An overcrowding crisis partly sparked by a policy not suited for an outbreak. Up until this week, Hong Kong authorities were forcing anyone who tested positive to be hospitalised. In the face of thousands of new cases each day, it's now been scrapped. Sarah Ho is a doctor from the city's hospital authority.
The current pandemic situation is very serious. The number of people waiting for medical treatment has surged. We now have to treat some of them outside.
Like in Sydney and Melbourne during the Delta waves, authorities are trying to roll out more vaccines and ordering residents to isolate at home. But unlike Australia, there's no path out. And China's leader Xi Jinping, now all but completely in charge of Hong Kong, has reminded local leader Carrie Lam that her overriding mission is to stabilise and control the outbreak. She's conceded some mistakes in her handling of it.
The problem we are facing is, given the magnitude of this fifth wave, it has outgrown our capacity. So I will have to say it very clearly that we have no plans for any widespread city lockdown as you have seen in some of the other places.
The pressure for lockdowns may grow with Xi Jinping's intervention, but Ben Cowley, a top epidemiologist at Hong Kong University, says a lockdown wouldn't be easy to do.
We could go to a citywide stay-at-home order, but that would only be a temporary solution because the virus would still spread within families, it would still spread within key workers, it would most likely still spread within building.
Professor Cowley says a lockdown at this point would only work if combined with mainland China's surveillance tools and the ability to isolate huge numbers of people and test them rapidly, something Hong Kong doesn't have.
At the moment, we have about 10,000 people waiting for admission, and that's at the moment.
He expects most people in Hong Kong in the coming months will get infected with Omicron. But with Beijing in control, that won't mean living with the virus. China's government is increasingly drawing a distinction, saying its COVID-0 approach saves lives and cares more about human rights than countries that live with the virus and tolerate some deaths.
It is 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. It's hard to imagine in a country like Japan that loneliness could be so widespread that the government has appointed someone to oversee the response to it. It's just part of the social crisis facing Japan as millions of single people turn their backs on marriage and children. It's just one aspect of a significant change in Japanese society where a decade ago singles would be so ashamed to be seen eating alone that they'd eat their meals in a bathroom stall. So what's changed? The ABC's Jake Sturmer reports.
It's time for a quick cut and style at the salon for Japanese woman Sayaka Kinjo's pride and joy. Unimaru is one of her 4 babies. Well, fur babies, to be precise. Today, she and the Maltese dachshund are off to a photo shoot. Sayaka is one of millions of young, single Japanese. And at 29, with a good career in the fashion industry, she's not interested in following the old rules of society here. No kids and no marriage.
Right now, there is nothing I can't do. I'm managing everything by myself, and I can pay for myself, so I'm not having any problems.
After World War II, traditionally, men would go to work and women stayed home to run the house and look after the kids. That led to an economic miracle for Japan. But that was shattered when the asset bubble burst in the 1990s. Women have increasingly moved into the workforce, but the long hours can make it hard to socialise outside of the office, and government statistics show that working women do 5 times the housework of their husbands. So the idea of marriage and kids is unappealing to many, like Sayaka and her friend Rika, who also brought her 2 dogs for a photo shoot.
Many Japanese men think women stay at home and take care of the family while men work in society. That idea's not bad, but I'd like them to be more cooperative with things at home. Women also want to work in society, so I feel it's hard to meet someone in Japan.
Marriage and birth numbers have been steadily falling for decades, and this, coupled with Japan's ageing population, is considered a national crisis. The economic consequences could be profound. If there aren't enough workers, whose taxes will pay for the pensions and healthcare for the growing numbers of elderly? And Japan has another problem. More than 1 million people are so stressed by the burdens and expectations of family and society, they've cut themselves off from the world entirely. It's so acute, it has its own word, hikikomori. 40-year-old Hidehiro Shinmasu is one of them. He's barely left his room for almost 2 decades. He spent days mentally preparing to allow me into his room inside his parents' house.
There is a lot of peer pressure and homogeneity in Japan, and there is not much tolerance for people who act differently or live differently. For example, people who don't go to school or can't work have a hard time getting out into the community. For example, if you go out on a weekday, people think you have a day off.
So far, efforts to address these problems have been failing, but the government now has a dedicated Minister for Loneliness and a task force has been established, but there's still a long way to go.
Private photos of women are being shared on the social media app Telegram without their consent. The app has seen a huge increase in the number of users in the last year, and while it claims to actively moderate public spaces and remove illegal pornography, an investigation has found hundreds of nude pictures shared in Telegram channels in more than 20 countries. Now there are calls for Telegram to better protect women's privacy and safety. The BBC's Hannah Gelbart has more.
On the seafront in Havana, in Cuba, Sarah's taking photos of fishermen as they reel in their catch. She comes here to find calm, ever since she found out that naked pictures of her were circulating on the social media app Telegram. Suddenly, she started receiving texts from strangers who knew her only from her nude photos. We've changed her name for her safety.
Que tuvieran acceso a mis redes sociales.
They had access to my social networks, Instagram, Facebook, even my phone number.
And several people wrote to me asking me to send them photos and saying they give me money for them. They made me feel like I was a prostitute because I share intimate photos of myself, and to them that meant that I had no value as a woman.
Sarah says she only shared the pictures with one other person, and she isn't sure how they ended up in a group with 18,000 followers, many of whom are from her neighbourhood, and may all have seen her naked. She reported it to Telegram but got no response, and she fears her photos are still on the app. Over the past 4 months, the BBC's global disinformation team has been speaking to women around the world like Sarah, whose intimate pictures have been shared without their consent on Telegram. We've been monitoring 42 Telegram groups worldwide, with a total of nearly 2 million subscribers. What we found is pretty shocking.
So that's her profile, that's her name and passport.
As well as the photos, groups sometimes post documents with the women's contact details, phone numbers, addresses.
Just that's her CV, actually.
Oh my God.
All her education, and...
During our investigation, an account from Russia even tried to sell us a folder full of child abuse videos for less than the price of a coffee.
So it says links, then home video from teenagers, and then the list of channels for adults only.
It's just shocking already. Just the fact that is there is shocking. We reported it to Telegram and the Metropolitan Police here in the UK, but 2 months later, the post and the channel were still there. Experts say anonymity and a lack of moderation on the app are a deliberate choice. Natalia Krapiva is the tech legal counsel at digital rights group Access Now.
According to Telegram and its owner Durov, right, they're all about protection of their users' freedom of expression. They don't want to censor their users, but the lack of moderation policies that they have, in fact, has the effect of silencing their users, and especially the most vulnerable users such as women, minorities, LGBTQI communities.
Natalia says she's seen cases where authoritarian regimes use leaked nudes as a tactic to intimidate political enemies.
And we see that a lot as being used in retaliation for women activists and journalists' work, of them being critical of the government, and their families as well can be put at risk.
That's what happened to Nigar, who's from Azerbaijan. In her sky blue kitchen, she's making us a pot of strong Azerbaijani tea.
My mom started crying and told me, "There's a video. It was sent to me." I was devastated, absolutely devastated.
In 2021, videos of her having sex with her husband were sent to her family and then posted in a Telegram group. Nigar says she was secretly filmed to blackmail her brother, who's a prominent critic of Azerbaijan's president.
The British royal family has found itself embroiled in 2 big scandals. UK police say they're investigating cash for honours allegations linked to the Prince of Wales charity called the Prince's Foundation. Meanwhile, there are questions about whether Prince Andrew should ever return to public engagements. The BBC's Nicholas Witchell has the story.
I'm here.
Turbulent moments they may be for members of her family. One person, though, was, as ever, staying calm and carrying on.
Good morning, Your Majesty. How are you?
Well, as you can see, I can't move.
Oh, well, many congratulations on the start of your Jubilee year.
Good morning.
The Queen was at Windsor Castle this morning, meeting military officials. There are still evidently some mobility issues, but her appearance dispels the rumours that she caught COVID from the Prince of Wales. And the underlying message, it is business as usual, despite the problems faced by not one, but 2 of her sons. First, Prince Charles. There's to be a formal police investigation into his charity, the Prince's Foundation, over allegations that honours and British citizenship were promised to a Saudi billionaire in return for cash donations to the charity. In a statement, the Metropolitan Police said, officers liaised with the Prince's Foundation about the findings of an independent investigation into fundraising practices. The Foundation provided a number of relevant documents. The assessment determined an investigation will commence. There have been no arrests or interviews under caution. The man who's expected to be at the centre of the investigation is Michael Fawcett, Chief Executive of the Prince's Foundation until his recent resignation. He's worked for Charles for decades. He used to be the Prince's valet. In a statement, Clarence House said, "The Prince of Wales had no knowledge of the alleged offer of honours or British citizenship on the basis of donation to his charities." And then to Prince Andrew and the continuing questions around his out-of-court settlement with Virginia Giuffre, variously estimated to be costing him anything up to £12 million. It's not thought Andrew has that kind of spare cash, so will the Queen have to help him?
If Andrew goes to the Queen for help, more than likely the money will come from the Duchy of Lancaster, which is effectively the Queen's cash cow. Last year, it brought her about £22 million in money, and it's really rental income from a portfolio of land.
It seems inconceivable that any public money from the sovereign grant would be used, but already there are calls for greater openness from the palace.
Andrew is going to have to confirm that the public haven't paid this, because that threatens to have wider implications for the royal family. They cannot be seen to be funding his miscreant behaviour.
For the royal family, the threat of a damaging court case involving Prince Andrew has been avoided, but a number of questions remain.
Let's get to some of your feedback before we head off on the protest and news that the Speaker has issued a statement basically on behalf of all the political parties saying there should be no discussion with the protesters until they meet some requirements like getting rid of the tents and the structures, behaving better towards passers-by. And there was a third thing, moving the cars. So this person, David, says, "I'm fully vaccinated but support freedom of speech. Good on David Seymour. The media has been embarrassingly cowardly not speaking with the protesters." Another person says, "Surprised a government that says it has empathy is going so out of its way to inflame things and put its head in the sand and hope it will all go away." But John says the government should not negotiate with the protesters. There is nothing to negotiate. The demands are incoherent, and any compromise would sell out the vulnerable in our community who depend on these necessary measures to keep them safe. And another one in the same vein, how do we negotiate with people who are down a disinformation rabbit hole? I have tried, they don't listen. Impound the vehicles, charge $200 to get them back, and they say bring in the police. This one on school exams. Jess says in the fifth form she scored 100% in the Australian science competition, and it was the absolute height of her success in life. That's all we've got time for. Tune in tomorrow at 5 a.m. First up is talking to people isolating at home with Omicron.
RNZ News headlines. Kia ora tātou, ko Iwi Ashton tēnei. All parties in Parliament have united under a clear declaration to the protesters outside. There'll be no dialogue while illegal activity persists. However, police say they'll continue talks with protest leaders. Auckland health authorities say the rollout of rapid antigen tests has started smoothly and they expect demand will gradually increase. And the head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade warns the Ukraine crisis is one of the most significant risks to peace and international security since the end of the